The Timberwolves lose twice this weekend, but all anyone's talking about is Anthony Edwards' career-high performance on Saturday and Joan Beringer playing legit rotation minutes over the weekend. Breaking down Ant and Beringer's weekend next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. That's 5 to 6:30 Central Time. Happy Monday, everybody. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day here in the U.S. And weirdly, the Wolves not playing today. Didn't play yesterday either. I feel like they've played most MLK days the last few years. But today we're talking about the weekend. The Wolves lost twice. Yes, that technically maybe is the headline, but guys missing both nights competitive, both compelling finishes, and Anthony Edwards dropping a career-high 55 points on Saturday, and Juan Baringer playing legit rotation minutes both games. Of course, an injury to Naz Reid on Saturday we'll talk about a little bit later. So this is kind of a combo, like a weekend takeaways, not quite a full post-game pod from Saturday, but we're mostly going to talk about the Spurs game, some observations across both games from the weekend, and then we'll get into, if Naz is out for any period of time, even if it's just a game or two, like what does this rotation look like, presuming that Rudy Gobert plays tomorrow night. So a lot to get to here today on the show. We're going to start, though, with Anthony Edwards' insane performance on Saturday. We're going to talk Beringer. Then we'll get into some of the looking ahead rotation type stuff on the show today. Big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. All right. So Friday night, the Timberwolves did not have Anthony Edwards. And, when I was recording middle of last week, the Wolves only played, Sunday last week. Ant did not play Tuesday. That was a blowout win over Milwaukee. And the thought at the time was, all right, he rests for 4 days, plays Friday night against Houston. That's a big game. And then they have San Antonio Saturday. Coming into the weekend, the Timberwolves already had, and they still do have, the tiebreaker over the Spurs, which matters in the crowded Western Conference. They only played them 3 times this year. They'd already beaten them twice. They had not played Houston yet. So the hope was that Ant could play Friday. They beat the Rockets. If he's got to sit Saturday on the back-to-back, fine. Give him 3 more days rest, right? 4 days of rest. He plays Friday, sits Saturday, gets 3 days of rest before they play Tuesday. But, like that to me would have made a lot of sense. Evidently, he wasn't ready to go on Friday. So he didn't play Friday night against the Rockets. And Houston was on the second night of a back-to-back too. Minnesota led at halftime. It was a larger lead in the second quarter. It was a narrower. I think they were up by 2 at halftime against Houston. And then things fell apart a little bit in the third quarter. The defense wasn't great. Then the fourth quarter offense was miserable. And Houston ended up pulling out that game on Friday. Saturday, Gobert does not play on the second night of a back-to-back, has hip soreness. Ant does come back. And then Naz Reid, 5 minutes into the game, leaves with a shoulder injury, does not return. So Friday's no Ant. Saturday's no Rudy and nothing but 5 minutes of Naz Reid. And yet both games were extremely entertaining. And in some ways, the reverse of each other. The Wolves played a great first half on Friday. And things started to fall apart a little bit before halftime. They ended up losing a close game to Houston. Saturday, they were within a bucket with like a minute to play. Saturday, it's a close game midway through the second quarter. And then the wheels fall off in the second quarter for Minnesota. Wemby hits like 3 threes in a row. The defense just is miserable. The offense stagnates just a little bit. And this crazy run by the Spurs finishes off the half, and Minnesota's down 25 at halftime on Saturday. But then they chip away throughout the third quarter. They drop 40 points in the third. They get to within 12, headed to the fourth. They take a lead with just a few minutes to play, and Anthony Edwards, I think he had 26 in the fourth quarter alone, finishes with a career-high 55 as the Timberwolves just like toe-to-toe, Wemby and Ant, and hopefully you had a chance to listen to the live postcast on Saturday night with Jack and Luke. Following that performance, I mean, it was one of the better quarters you're ever going to see. Certainly one of the better back-to-backs, or I should say back and forths between and back-to-backs. The Wolves played Friday and Saturday. But Wemby and Ant going back and forth, blow for blow. And Dante DiVincenzo had a couple of big threes down the stretch after not really playing well for most of the game. That made this thing really interesting. And then ultimately the Spurs pulled out the win. My key takeaways from the weekend Like, I'll hit you with a couple quick ones from Friday, and then I want to dig in a bit on Ant's performance. Friday, free throws, obviously, like, we don't need to talk much more about that, but the free throw shooting was horrific for both teams, yes. But if the Wolves shot free throws like at a normal rate, made free throws at a normal rate, they would have won. We talked about the turnovers in the fourth quarter. I think that 8 just in the fourth quarter alone. Some bad offensive possessions. Julius Randle, I thought, played well for most of the game, but it was a terrible fourth quarter for Julius. Of course, no Ant. And then on Saturday, you get Ant. And Ant goes off in the fourth quarter, and he closes. Like, if they had Ant Friday, he closes that way against the Rockets. They win that game hands down. And then down the stretch, as Minnesota came back, the pace they injected into the game, which I talked about late last week, like, Minnesota's been better when they're playing faster here lately. The defense was very good against the Spurs, the activity level, the ball movement on offense. And then Ant and also Jaden McDaniels during the comeback made some great shots. Anthony Edwards, it's hard to understate just how good he's been. And I know he's missed the 2 games prior to Saturday. We talked about this a little bit on Friday's show, and there was another day last week I hit it as well. But Ant is shooting the ball better from every area on the floor this year. And I'm not going to stop. Like, we're going to talk a bunch about this week. Minnesota only plays Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. So we'll have a couple shows, including tomorrow's, where I can dig in on some stuff. And I mean, Anthony Edwards, dude scored 55 on 33 shots. That is really, really efficient. That's what, like a little better than a 1.5 per shot. That's crazy. 19 of 33, 9 of 16 on threes. He was 10 of 17 on twos, which is a really good number. And he was shooting some mid-range shots, but he also got to the rim quite a bit. 8 of 10 at the free throw line for Anthony Edwards. He also had 3 assists, only 2 turnovers, which is, the turnover rate's down for him this year, which is so incredible given how much he's had the ball in his hands. The only player with a better plus-minus than Ant in this game was Juan Beringer, who had a +9 or I should say Ant was a +8. Anthony Edwards was phenomenal at all 3 levels. He left the game briefly in the third quarter it looked like he tweaked the foot that he's been dealing with and was stretching it out on the bench. And apparently it's been reported that it's a toe on that foot that's bothering him the most. I think somebody reported that on TV Friday. I think it was on the ESPN broadcast. They were talking about it. But it was amazing. Tough mid-range shots, had a spin move and a fadeaway from the baseline where he beat Wemby off the dribble in the first half. Just a bevy of 3-point shots late in the game. And of course, ended up shooting better than 50% from outside the arc, which is just crazy. Well, I'd be better for 50% on 2s and 3s. And 8 of 10 at the free throw line. We'll take that. The Wolves as a team, after shooting their free throws miserably on Friday, they were 89% on Saturday against San Antonio. And that was, of course, a big deal in a close game. And San Antonio only shot 61%, which is part of the reason the Wolves were able to get back in this game, is that the Spurs really struggled at the free throw line. We're going to talk more about this, but Ant's performance on Saturday, just nearly impeccable. We'll talk about the bigger picture and just how dominant he's been as a scorer. And he's making the case for first team All NBA this year. I mean, he is. There's a chance, and I know if Ant misses 6 or 7 more games, then he wouldn't be eligible for awards. But Jokic probably won't be eligible for first team All NBA. And it's really hard, and Wemby may not be as well. And if you take those 2 out of it, no matter how you slice it, even with those 2, Ant's a top 6 player. Now he becomes a top 4 player if those guys aren't included, which means he is on the All NBA list. He's got a shot at being an all-star starter. I mean, Edwards has, it's always been the best way for Minnesota to go from a conference finals team to a finals team and beat the win total that everybody had them at. What were they, 49.5 this year on FanDuel? And I took the over. I thought they'd win 52 to 54 games, I think is what I said preseason. The best way for that to happen was always going to be natural improvement from Anthony Edwards and, to a lesser extent, Jaden McDaniels. And I've talked about that many times on the show. Julius Randle mostly is what he is. There's peaks and valleys. As we saw just Friday and Saturday, there were plenty of peaks and valleys with Julius Randle's game. Rudy Gobert has played better than I think anyone expected him to this year, but kind of basically the same thing. Everybody else has kind of proven they're locked into who they are. Could the Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels progression overtake the Mike Conley and Rudy Gobert regression? That essentially was the biggest question coming into the season. Yeah, the Rob Dillingham role, the TJ Shannon role, what could that turn out to be? And that's been bad, right? It hasn't worked at all. Both from a production and then an injury standpoint when it comes to Shannon. But that is less of a big deal. On the scale of how much is that going to impact the season? Ant becoming a super duper star and going supernova and being an MVP candidate was always going to outweigh any of the other stuff. And that appears to be happening. Now, can he stay on the court? They went 1-1 in the games he missed last week, right? And then they lost the back-to-back Saturday with no Rudy and no Naz. Can he stay on the court, which has never been a problem throughout his career, but can he manage this foot injury? Can the Wolves manage the foot injury to the point where it doesn't get worse and he can still play and pick his spots and not miss too many more games? Maybe it's just the occasional back-to-back, he misses a game or whatever. That's the biggest question. Because if this is what Anthony Edwards is now, it's over. Like, I mean, the Wolves are going to be a top 3 seed in the West. If he's going to play anywhere remotely close to how he's played over the last couple of weeks when he's been on the court, he's a top 4 player, top 5 player. I don't know how else you could possibly, like, what other conclusion you could come to. And then the other thing that is perhaps unexpected, and maybe put this in the category of combating the issues or the shortcomings of the Dillingham/Shannon role in the rotation, is Juan Baringer. We're going to talk Beringer next, what he did Friday and Saturday, because he did play in Friday's game as well, prior to the injuries to Gobert and Naz Reid. So we'll talk about Beringer's weekend, the rotation a little bit, and then we'll close by peeking ahead to the week upcoming. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at FanDuel. Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel's making them even better. Every Friday night before the games tip off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Fridays from 6 to 7:30 Eastern, that is 5 to 6:30 p.m. Central Time, have become appointment viewing with NBA Happy Hour. Opening the FanDuel app during Happy Hour always brings something new. Boosts, bonuses, and surprises. It's easy to check the weekly special before tip-off and make a move before the window closes. The timing is perfect right before the games, right before the weekend starts. It adds extra energy to Friday night basketball without overthinking it. I know Friday, the Wolves, this is prime for Minnesota being on in prime time on ESPN at an 8:30 p.m. tip against the Rockets. Hopefully you headed to FanDuel on a Friday. Before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 Eastern. That's 5 to 6:30 p.m. Central. A little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour only on FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen of the day. And, of course, thanks for helping to make Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you have not already, go check out the new Everydayer Club. You'll get access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Wolves, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. You also get an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server. It includes a group chat just for listeners of this show. I joined the Discord just last week. Been on there every day, so jump in and join the conversation about the Timberwolves. Again, you go to lockedonwolves.supercast.com, or you can tap the link in the show notes to learn more. That's lockedonwolves.supercast.com. All right. So we talked to Ant. Lots more Ant to come this week. Let's talk about Joan Beringer. So coming into the season, Beringer being the Timberwolves' first-round pick in this year's draft, and I tried to set the expectation in the offseason, look, this dude's not going to play any rotation minutes this year. With the caveat being, there's zero big man depth. When they drafted him, Jesse Edwards was still on a two-way deal. They ultimately let Jesse Edwards go, and of course also drafted Rocco Zakarsky, who's also going to see zero rotation minutes at the NBA level this year. And so that was an indicator, and we talked about this on the show, that they like what they've seen from Joan Beringer. There's no big man depth. Luka Garza is gone. Leonard Miller would be the only other guy who's also never played rotation minutes until Saturday. But obviously a very different type of player, more of a point power forward type center, if you will, than Beringer, who's defensive minded, more of a vertical lob threat, pick and roll big. Like that's the archetype he is. Very different than Leonard Miller. But there's no Luka Garza, there's no Jesse Edwards, there's no insurance policy on this roster. And that made me think they really like Beringer. That said, they're not going to force the issue with the teenager who didn't turn 19 until November. He was 18 for the first month of the regular season. Had hardly played in the G League. Like, they weren't just going to squeeze minutes in for a teenager. That wouldn't have made sense. However, given how good he's looked in garbage time minutes, and I would add Las Vegas Summer League to that, he looked very solid in the Summer League. Looked the part. And I pulled up my notes last week from Summer League, and I talked through them on the show. All the same stuff I said. I think I've got him here still. All the same stuff I said in the summer league with Beringer is true. The feel is so impressive. The size is obviously extremely impressive. The floor for what he's able to do already is so impressive. Quick off his feet, great second jump ability. Great feel offensively for where to be and when for a dude that's only played basketball for a half decade. And of course, still is a teenager. So all that stuff is true. The Wolves felt good enough about him that as soon as they needed somebody to play, they could give Beringer those minutes, and he was effective. When Gobert was suspended, it was like, look, we don't have anyone else. We'll throw him out there against Giannis. And I know Chris Fitz tried to protect him and try to not have him matched up against Giannis too much, but he did so well that inevitably, or eventually, he left him on the floor, and he was on the same floor as Antetokounmpo, or the floor at the same time as Giannis. And then Friday, when everyone was healthy, all the bigs were healthy at least, they still found 7 rotation minutes for Joan Beringer. And he was fine. He only had 1 board in 7 minutes. And that, of course, is going to be the thing. The defensive rebounding is the one thing that, I shouldn't say the one thing, but it's the biggest thing that he still needs to work on. And then Saturday, when Gobert's not playing, he already was going to play. Naz Reid goes down. Beringer ends up playing 23 minutes, more minutes off the bench than anyone else. 5th on the team in minutes. And he would have played more, except for he got into foul trouble and ultimately fouled out at the end of the game. But he looked very comfortable in this game against none other than Victor Wembanyama, fellow countryman and all that. Beringer is an NBA player right now, and the sky truly is the limit. Because if this is the floor of what Juan Baringer can do, what we've seen in all, everything I listed already, preseason, summer league, G League, and now garbage time, and now rotation minutes at the NBA level, like the sky truly is the limit. If this is the floor, he's already a 20-minute-a-game bench guy. And we talked a little bit late last week about could Naz Reid play more at the 3, and the answer is certainly yes. They did it on Friday. I think virtually all of the 7 minutes Beringer played Friday were with Naz Reid at the 3. There might have been a couple of minutes here and there where Beringer was at the 5 and there wasn't a third big on the floor. But assuming this Naz Reid injury is not long-term, and if it's a couple games, then obviously there's minutes for Beringer there anyway, 18 to 22 a game. But say hopefully Naz isn't hurt for a longer period of time, and Naz and Rudy and Julius Randle are all healthy, like you can find 10 to 15 minutes a game for Beringer, assuming you can play Naz Reid at the 3. And I talked to him on the show last week, like he's already basically doing that offensively anyway. You just obviously can't have Gobert and Beringer on the floor at the same time. So that's the only wrinkle there. But again, if he plays like he has Tuesday, Friday, Saturday of last week, then you got to find minutes for him. And on Saturday in the 23 minutes, he had 10 points and 8 boards. The only shot he missed was in the final minute of the game when Wembanyama blocked an attempt from Beringer. I think it was a reverse layup attempt, and Wemby could have been called for a foul. They never really showed a replay on TV, and Chris Finch ultimately got that technical with Wemby missed the free throw, and it ended up not hurting the Wolves, but in a pivotal moment, because if Beringer, that foul gets called there, he's at the free throw line down 1, and odds are he makes at least 1. I mean, he's a pretty good free throw shooter, and you're talking a tie game or maybe a 1-point Timberwolves lead. That's the only shot he missed all game. Now they're all tip-ins and dunks and layups, but still 5 of 5 until that shot for 10 points, 8 boards, 3 assists and only 1 turnover, and a couple of blocks, both coming in the fourth quarter of this game during the Timberwolves comeback, both impressive plays. And once again, the majority of his rebounds, 5 of his 8 rebounds were on the offensive glass. And I said this last week, but I'll say it again if you missed it. Beringer is a fantastic offensive rebounder because it's all hustle, want to, and athletic profile and ability, right? He's long, athletic, and he plays hard. That's a recipe for success on the offensive glass. That's what offensive rebounding is all about. There's a skill to, there's certainly some skill, and the more he plays, the better he's going to get, which is what's so scary. The defensive glass, though, is much more about a skill. It's about positioning. It's about strength and boxing out and understanding where to be. If the ball comes from the left side, it's more likely going to come off the rim on the right side and some of that stuff. That's a work in progress. Beringer gets pushed around on the defensive glass. He doesn't box out well in part because he's so slight. That's the one issue I see with him. Obviously, a somewhat limited offensive game, but the dude just turned 19 and he's barely played. So, I'm not worried at all about that. Ultimately, he's not going to be Giannis, right? Like that's not the game. Even if the defensive profile is a lot like Giannis, and it is. I mean that. But the offensive game, I don't think will be as explosive as Giannis. But if he's dominant defensively and is just a really dynamic role big on offense and understands spacing and all that stuff like he appears to, then yeah, there's more offensive upside than say Rudy Gobert even, I would say. And I don't know that he'll be as good as Rudy defensively. He's a different type of defender. He's more of a Giannis than he is a traditional rim protector like Rudy. But the point I'm getting at is the defensive glass is the thing he's got to improve on. If he wants to see those minutes improve or minutes increase over time, he's got to get better on the defensive glass. And he got pushed around a little bit in this game. He wasn't on the floor for the game sealing defensive rebound, or I should say offensive rebound for the Spurs because he had just fouled out. That was a function of Randle got beat to the inside and Ant didn't do a good enough job of being aggressive getting to the ball. I mean, they only had 3 guys on the lane and Ant should have been either crashing to help Randle handle Wemby, or he should have been going to the shooter to box out the shooter. And he didn't do either one of those things. He kind of got stuck behind Wemby. And that it was more Wemby being Wemby than it was Ant and Randle messing up. But all that say, Beringer was not on the floor. Wemby got the rebound that sealed the game, and that was that. But Beringer, they have to find a way for him to play. And I know I went hard to the paint middle of last week, Wednesday or Thursday, I think it was Thursday, talking about where do you find minutes for him? And I still believe that because it's a limited number of minutes. You can't take minutes from Randle, Naz, Rudy. You could chip away at the Mike Conley and maybe even the DiVincenzo minutes because I think he's been overextended a little bit here lately. We've seen some of the issues. And I don't know if it's just a straight minutes thing or just being exposed because he's playing more, what some of the shortcomings are. Eat into maybe the Jalen Clark minutes, probably the Bones minutes. He wasn't quite as good this weekend as he has been. You could find a few minutes here and there as long as you're comfortable playing Naz at the 3, and I think they should be. I just don't think it's more than 12 minutes a game, right? So then you get 12 minutes there, you trim a couple Rudy minutes to try and keep him fresh here and there, and you get to 15, 18 to 20 minutes a game for Beringer. I think that's reasonable. I think it's a stretch to try and get him more minutes than that, barring, significant foul trouble or injury like we saw on Saturday. But if nothing else, the Wolves are now comfortable with him doing that. Like he played 23 minutes and probably would have played 30 if he hadn't been in foul trouble for much of the time he was on the floor on Saturday. All right, let's close by putting a bow on the rotation talk, and then we'll peek ahead and look at the week as the Wolves have a little bit of an easier week than what they've seen here recently. But the West standings are intriguing, to say the least. We'll do all that here next to close out the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at GameTime. During basketball season, there is nothing like being in the building. The energy, the crowd, the first big run that gets everyone on their feet. Fans want to be there for those moments, not stuck refreshing screens or guessing what tickets are really going to cost. And that's where GameTime comes in. The GameTime app gives fans the advantage back, making it incredibly easy to score amazing tickets fast, simple, and without the guesswork. Browsing the GameTime app is straightforward and intuitive. Finding tickets takes just a few taps. You can see the view from your seat before buying, and that'll help make choosing tickets easy, and it'll help make you confident in that process. The prices include the fees up front, so the total is clear from the start. That's my favorite thing about it, so you're not surprised there. Plus, features like zone deals help unlock great seats at even better value, whether it's an NBA game, and the Wolves are back on Thursday. They start a 3-game homestand, one against the Bulls, a couple against the Warriors, or it's another live event. Everything's right there in one place. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. All right, so putting a bow on the rotation talk, I think there are minutes for Beringer. I think they're maybe more limited than what fans would like to see. But again, like you got to play to your team's strengths. And so that is the front court at this point, right? Like the backcourt, if you're not going to have the minutes available in the back or the guys that you want to get on the court in the backcourt, and you just got to play a little bit bigger and sacrifice a little bit of offense. If Ant's going to play like this, you could do that. If the defense, and honestly, like that was the problem in the Spurs game. They got 48 points in the second quarter. That was the problem. The offense was the problem late in the Rockets game. There was no Anthony Edwards. The problem in the Spurs game was the second quarter, they gave up 48 points. the defense was miserable. There was no Gobert, and Beringer got himself into foul trouble. Like, the defense was just bad. But if you have Gobert and you have Beringer and you ultimately play a little bit bigger and the defense stays as a top right now, I think they're 7th in the league coming out of the play on Saturday. If they could be a top 5 defense down the stretch and then the offense stays top 10 and Ant does Ant stuff in clutch moments, and I think that's a fair thing to count on at this point, then you're going to be all right. And you don't need, I'm not saying they don't, but in that situation, you don't absolutely need another backcourt creator. I still think they're going to try to do it. We'll talk more about it as we get closer to the deadline. We're only 2.5 weeks away now from the trade deadline, but it'd be helpful to have somebody else to be in that Bones, like an option in the Bones Jalen Clark role. We'll see what that looks like, but it becomes less necessary if Ant's going supernova and your front court defense is so impressive. Then it becomes less necessary. I should also say in the Mike Conley role as well. Like, Conley, again, just does not look comfortable playing at all. So that would be the other guy who's going to lose minutes. I think Conley would probably lose minutes before Bones in this situation if the Wolves are able to get more backcourt help. Okay. Peeking ahead to the week, the Wolves have, they're in a tough stretch of the schedule. January was always going to be tougher, a lot more back-to-backs. They had another one this weekend. So they've had, every weekend they've had a back-to-back since New Year's. Let's see. They had one. Yeah, they've had a Saturday, Sunday, the last 2 weekends, then a Friday, Saturday this week. So they've had 3 back-to-backs in January after having none in December. And they have another one coming up, not this week, but the week after. And they have the Thunder on the second night of a back-to-back, which is unbelievable. Anyway, this week, they're at Utah to close out the road trip on Tuesday. Tanking Utah. They've been playing better recently, but obviously you need to win that game. So if they do, they'll be 2-2 on the trip. They go back home for the Bulls on Thursday, and then Saturday, Monday against the Warriors, both at Target Center. So all winnable games, all games the Wolves will be favored in. At Utah, home for the Bulls, and 2 against the Warriors. At Dallas, they'll be favored in that one. And then that's the road home the week after next, where they come home for a 1-game homestand to play the Thunder on Thursday the 29th, which is just brutal. And then they do the double away game at Memphis to close out the month of January and the first part of February. So they really should win their next 4 games, actually next 5 games going into that game against the Thunder, and they should do whatever they can to make that happen. No back-to-backs until that Thunder game. So hopefully Naz can be back by Tuesday. He gets 2 full days off. Rudy gets 3 days off because he didn't play Saturday. And then Ant gets the 2 days off after playing 40 minutes coming off the injury. He plays 40 minutes on Saturday. So hopefully Ant will be good to go by Tuesday. Of course, that game's in Utah, so it's at altitude. But we'll talk about that matchup on tomorrow's show. And we'll also talk a little bit more about the offense overall. We'll talk a little bit more about the rotations, and also very specifically wanting to talk about Ant and his offensive game, because like the numbers just keep getting crazier. And we'll talk some all-star picks at some point. I think a lot of the different sites and writers are putting out who they would pick for all-star starters. So we'll get into that as well. I think that is always a fun conversation, but keep an eye on that. And again, trade deadline 2 weeks from Thursday. Trade deadline is February 5th. 1 week from Thursday or 2 weeks from Thursday. I don't know. It does matter, but I think it's 2 weeks from Thursday, if I'm doing my math right. Or is it only 1 week from Thursday? That's crazy that we're already there. No, 2 weeks from Thursday. Okay. So we're 2.5 weeks out from the deadline. And it's going to be very interesting to see what the Wolves are able to do. So that's another thing we'll keep an eye on, any of the rumors that are out there. Although I think the way the Wolves have played lately, even given the losses Friday and Saturday, we've given the excuses for those losses, and I think they're valid. There's a lot to like over the last week. The blowout win over Milwaukee without Ant, the close loss to Houston without Ant, and then the close loss to San Antonio with no Rudy and Naz, and all the Beringer stuff over the last week. Like, think about a week ago. There's a big comeback over the Spurs last Sunday, but there was some hand-wringing, with no Ant on Tuesday and what's Beringer going to look like. And I think even though they've gone 1-2 over the last week, I think for the most part, Wolves fans feel okay about where the Timberwolves are sitting. Oh, and then very quickly, I was going to mention the Western Conference standings. This is, I'm recording this like midway through the games on Sunday. So as of right now, Minnesota's 4th in the West. They're still a game ahead of Houston, despite the loss to them on Friday. They're a game ahead of Houston, a game and a half ahead of the Lakers. They, of course, do not have the tiebreaker against either of those teams right now. They're now 2.5 games behind the Denver Nuggets and 2.5 games behind the Spurs. They do have the tiebreaker over the Spurs. And of course, play Denver here upcoming, probably once Jokic comes back. So top 3 seed very much still in play. but they're also 2 games away from falling into the play-in. So every game matters in the West. I just feel pretty good overall about where the Wolves sit as of right now. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll preview the Jazz game, among other topics. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. And a reminder, if you never miss an episode, go check out the Everydayer Club. It's built for you. Get Locked On Wolves ad-free, plus members-only Discord access. Head into the Discord chat. I'll be in there every day this week and more. Head to lockedonwolves.supercast.com to join the club. And if you're watching on video, we'll send you, after this episode is over, to the first ever 24/7 National NBA YouTube channel on audio. Make sure that you make your second listen NBA Game Night on Locked On NBA. Of course, this show is also part of the very same Locked On Podcast Network, your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.